The dust swirled in the late afternoon sun as Eden Parker stepped off the stagecoach, her emerald eyes scanning the rugged town of Redemption Creek. The year was 1878, and this forgotten corner of Arizona territory represented her last chance at a respectable life. Her crimson dress, though modest by city standards, immediately drew stares from the men loitering outside the saloon across the dirt road. Eden adjusted her small hat and lifted her chin, determined not to show the fear that threatened to consume her. "Miss Parker, I presume." A stern voice broke through her thoughts. The man who approached wore a black coat despite the sweltering heat, his collar marking him unmistakably as the town preacher. His weathered face betrayed no warmth as he extended a hand. "Reverend Thomas Blackwell, we received word of your arrival. The schoolhouse is prepared." Eden nodded politely, remembering the correspondence that had brought her to this dusty outpost. "Thank you, Reverend. I'm eager to begin my duties." "The children need proper education, Miss Parker, but I must warn you." His eyes traveled briefly over her form before returning to her face with obvious disapproval. "This is a God-fearing community. Your predecessor understood the value of modesty and proper conduct." Before Eden could respond, the sound of spurs jangling against wooden planks caught her attention. A tall figure emerged from the general store, a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. His dark hair peeked out beneath a well-worn hat, stubble lining a jaw that could have been carved from stone. Unlike the other men who stared openly, his gaze met hers with frank assessment but no lecherous intent. "Reverend," the stranger nodded to Blackwell before turning to Eden. "Madam." His voice was deep, tinged with an accent she couldn't place. "Mr. Cross," the preacher's tone cooled noticeably. "Miss Parker is our new schoolteacher." The man Cross studied her a moment longer, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "Welcome to Redemption Creek, Miss Parker." "Morgan Cross, at your service." Eden felt her cheeks warm under his intense gaze. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Cross." The Reverend cleared his throat. "I was just explaining to Miss Parker the importance of appropriate behavior in our community. After the difficulties with her references, she should be particularly mindful of her reputation." Morgan's eyebrow raised slightly. "Is that so?" He turned to Eden. "Don't mind the Reverend, Miss Parker. He believes most women are put on this earth to tempt men to sin." Reverend Blackwell's face flushed with anger. "Mind your tongue, Cross. Not all of us have your libertine attitude toward morality." "She's here to teach children their letters, not lead a revival," Morgan replied, his voice level but with steel beneath. Then, meeting the preacher's glare with calm assurance, he added, "Besides, if Miss Parker is as tempting as you suggest, then I'm happy to be the first who'll fall willingly." Eden's breath caught in her throat at the boldness of his statement, even as the Reverend sputtered in outrage. Morgan tipped his hat to her, a smile playing at his lips before continuing down the street. "That man," Reverend Blackwell muttered, composing himself. "A dangerous influence. I suggest you keep your distance, Miss Parker, if you value your position here." Eden nodded absently, watching Morgan Cross's retreating figure. She had come to Redemption Creek seeking refuge from her past, not complications. Yet something about the man's directness, the way he had so casually challenged the preacher's judgment, stirred something inside her that she thought had long since died. "Your boarding room is prepared at Mrs. Wilson's," the Reverend continued. "I'll have someone bring your luggage. School begins Monday morning." "Thank you, Reverend," Eden replied, forcing her attention back to the man before her. "I assure you, I understand the importance of my position." As the preacher led her toward a modest two-story house down the street, Eden couldn't help glancing over her shoulder. Morgan Cross stood outside the saloon now, watching her with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, he nodded once, a gesture that somehow felt like both a greeting and a promise. Eden quickly looked away. Her new life in Redemption Creek was supposed to be about starting over, about proving she could be the respectable woman her past wouldn't allow. The last thing she needed was the attention of a man like Morgan Cross, no matter how her heart had quickened at his words. The boarding house proved to be clean if sparse, run by a widow named Mrs. Wilson who greeted Eden with more warmth than the Reverend had shown. The older woman showed Eden to a small but comfortable room on the second floor, with a window overlooking the main street. "It ain't much, Mrs. Wilson said, but it's clean and the meals are regular. Most of the other boarders are passing through, but Mr. Harris across the hall has been here going on 2 years now. Works at the bank. It's perfect," Eden assured her, grateful for any shelter after the long journey. "I start teaching on Monday." Mrs. Wilson nodded approvingly. "Good to have a proper school teacher again. Last one left rather sudden." She hesitated, then added, "Don't you mind the Reverend too much. His bark's worse than his bite, mostly. Though he does keep a close eye on the schoolmarm, being that the school's attached to the church and all." After Mrs. Wilson left, Eden sat on the edge of the narrow bed, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. She unpacked her few belongings, carefully hanging her 3 dresses in the small wardrobe. The crimson one, the one that had drawn such disapproving looks, she tucked at the back. Perhaps it was too bold for a schoolteacher in a place like this. A knock at her door startled her. When she opened it, she found a young boy, no more than 12, struggling with her large trunk. "Mr. Cross sent me to bring this up, madam," he huffed, dragging it into her room when she stepped aside. "Said you might need it before morning." "Mr. Cross?" Eden was surprised. "But the Reverend said." "Mr. Cross saw the stagecoach driver charging double to bring it over, so he paid him and told me to do it instead," the boy explained. "Said you'd probably appreciate saving the money, being new in town and all." Eden felt a rush of gratitude, followed immediately by wariness. Why would a stranger concern himself with her affairs? "What's your name?" she asked the boy. "Samuel, madam. I'll be in your class come Monday." "Well, thank you, Samuel." She reached for her purse, but the boy shook his head. "Already been paid, madam. Mr. Cross is generous that way." He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Madam, don't believe everything the Reverend says about Mr. Cross. He's a good man. Helped my ma when Pa died in the mine collapse last year." After Samuel left, Eden stood at her window, watching as twilight descended on Redemption Creek. The saloon across the street came to life as lamps were lit, and piano music drifted through the evening air. She could see Morgan Cross standing outside, talking to a man she didn't recognize. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, straight at her window. Though the distance was too great to see his expression clearly, she felt the intensity of his attention like a physical touch. Eden stepped back from the window, her heart racing. She had come here to escape scandal, not invite it. Whatever game Morgan Cross was playing, she wanted no part of it. Yet even as she turned away, she couldn't forget his words to the preacher, or the way his eyes had held hers without flinching. The next morning, Eden rose early, determined to familiarize herself with the schoolhouse before Monday. After a simple breakfast with Mrs. Wilson and the other boarders, including Mr. Harris from the bank, who seemed pleasant if somewhat colorless, she made her way to the white clapboard building attached to the small church. The schoolhouse was a single room with rows of benches facing a teacher's desk on a raised platform. Shelves lined one wall, holding a meager collection of books and supplies. Eden ran her fingers over the worn spines, noting which text she would need to supplement with her own knowledge. Not much to work with, is it? She whirled around to find Morgan Cross leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed casually over his chest. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, the weathered tan of his skin suggesting long hours outdoors, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that appeared when he smiled, as he was doing now. "Mr. Cross," she acknowledged, keeping her voice even. "I wasn't expecting company." He stepped inside, hat in hand. "Saw you heading this way. Thought you might want to know more about your students than the Reverend's likely to tell you." Eden hesitated. The Reverend's warning echoed in her mind, yet she needed all the information she could get. "What can you tell me?" Morgan moved closer, stopping at a respectful distance. 23 children altogether, ages 6 to 16. Samuel, who brought your trunk yesterday, is bright but struggles with reading. The Miller twins are troublemakers but good-hearted. And little Sarah Jenkins hasn't spoken a word since her mother died last winter. Eden was surprised by his detailed knowledge. "You seem well informed about the children for," she paused, realizing she had no idea what his position in the town was. A smile tugged at his mouth. "For a man the Reverend considers morally questionable," he shrugged. "I own the cattle operation north of town. Most of these kids' parents work for me or trade with me. Their welfare matters." "I see." Eden studied him with new interest. "Not just some drifter, then, but a man of property and influence. Thank you for sending Samuel with my trunk yesterday. Stagecoach drivers are notorious for overcharging newcomers," he replied easily. "Especially pretty ones." Eden felt her cheeks warm at the compliment but kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Cross, I appreciate your help, but I should make something clear. I came to Redemption Creek for a fresh start. My position here depends on maintaining a respectable reputation. And you think I threaten that?" There was no mockery in his question, only genuine curiosity. "The Reverend seems to think so," she answered carefully. Morgan laughed, a rich sound that filled the small schoolhouse. "The Reverend thinks dancing leads straight to damnation. His opinion of me has more to do with the fact that I don't attend his 3-hour sermons than any actual sins I've committed." Eden found herself smiling despite her reservations. "And yet you implied to him that I was. Tempting." "I implied that if you were, I wouldn't mind." His eyes held hers, the humor in them softening into something warmer. "There's a difference between appreciating beauty and disrespecting it, Miss Parker." Before Eden could formulate a response, the door opened again, and Reverend Blackwell entered, his expression darkening at the sight of Morgan. "Miss Parker," he said stiffly, "I see Mr. Cross has taken it upon himself to welcome you." The disapproval in his voice was unmistakable. "Mr. Cross was kind enough to tell me about my future students," Eden replied, moving toward her desk to create distance between herself and Morgan. "Indeed." The Reverend's tone suggested he doubted that was all they'd discussed. "Mr. Cross, I believe your foreman was looking for you at the general store. Something about cattle prices." Morgan didn't appear bothered by the obvious dismissal. "Thank you, Reverend. I'll seek him out." He turned to Eden. "Welcome again to Redemption Creek, Miss Parker. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." After he left, the Reverend fixed Eden with a stern look. "I warned you about that man, Miss Parker. His reputation with women is concerning." "We were only talking about the children," Eden assured him, though she felt a flash of irritation at his presumption. "Perhaps, but a woman in your position cannot be too careful." He paused, letting his words sink in. "After all, we took a considerable risk accepting you without proper references. Your letter explaining your circumstances was compelling, but many would have turned you away." Eden swallowed hard. The reminder of her precarious situation stung, as he'd intended it to. "I understand, Reverend, and I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Good." His expression softened slightly. "You'll join us for services tomorrow, of course. The congregation is eager to meet you." That night, Eden found sleep elusive. From her window, she could see the saloon across the street, still lively despite the late hour. She had seen Morgan enter earlier, had watched as men greeted him with obvious respect. Whatever the Reverend's opinion, it seemed Morgan Cross was well regarded by many in town. She wondered about his background, about what had brought him to this remote place. He didn't have the rough edges of the typical cowhand, nor the slick manner of a gambler. There was an education in his speech, a confidence in his bearing that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. Eden turned away from the window, chiding herself for her interest. It didn't matter who Morgan Cross was or wasn't. She had come to Redemption Creek to rebuild her life, to escape the scandal that had forced her from Philadelphia. The last thing she needed was to attract attention by associating with a man the town preacher disapproved of, no matter how intriguing she found him. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Eden dressed carefully in her most conservative gown, a navy blue that buttoned high at the neck, and pinned her hair in a simple but neat style. Her appearance at church would set the tone for how the town, and more importantly, the parents of her students would view her. The small church was nearly full when she arrived. Mrs. Wilson, walking beside her, greeted neighbors cheerfully and introduced Eden to so many people that she feared she would never remember all the names. The Reverend nodded approvingly when he saw her, gesturing to a seat near the front that had apparently been saved for the town's new schoolteacher. As the service began, Eden couldn't help noticing that Morgan Cross was nowhere to be seen. The Reverend's sermon, on the theme of temptation and moral vigilance, seemed pointedly directed at the absent rancher, and, Eden suspected, at herself by association. "The devil works through many instruments," Reverend Blackwell intoned, his gaze sweeping the congregation. "Sometimes through the bottle, sometimes through cards and gambling, and sometimes," here his eyes seemed to linger on Eden, "through the fair face of a woman who knows not her own power to lead men astray." Eden kept her expression neutral, though she felt a flush of anger at his insinuation. She had done nothing to warrant such a warning, nothing except arrive in a dress that showed no more skin than any other woman's traveling clothes might have. After the service, several parents approached to introduce themselves and their children. They seemed genuinely pleased to have a teacher for their young ones, and Eden began to relax slightly. Perhaps the Reverend's attitude wasn't shared by everyone. She was speaking with Mrs. Miller about her twins when she felt the atmosphere in the churchyard shift. Turning, she saw Morgan Cross approaching, dressed not in his usual working clothes but in a well-tailored dark suit. He nodded politely to those he passed, stopping occasionally to exchange a few words before making his way to where Eden stood. "Miss Parker," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Mrs. Miller." The older woman smiled warmly at him. "Morgan, I was beginning to think you'd sleep through the entire morning and miss meeting our new schoolteacher properly." "Never." His eyes met Eden's, a hint of humor in them. "Though I see I missed the Reverend's service." "What a shame, Mrs. Miller said, though her tone suggested she didn't think it much of a loss. "He was quite invigorating today." "I can imagine," Morgan replied dryly. To Eden he added, "I hope you're finding Redemption Creek welcoming, Miss Parker." "Everyone has been very kind," she answered, aware of the Reverend watching their interaction from the church steps. "Glad to hear it." Morgan seemed about to say more when a small figure darted between them, a little girl of about 7, her blonde hair in disarray as she flung herself at him. "Mr. Cross, did you bring candy? You promised." Morgan laughed, lifting the child easily. "Sarah Jenkins, you'll ruin a man's reputation as a fearsome rancher talking about candy in public." But he reached into his pocket and produced a small, wrapped sweet, which the girl took eagerly. Eden watched in amazement. This was Sarah, the child he had mentioned, the one who hadn't spoken since her mother's death. Yet here she was, chattering happily to the man the Reverend had warned her about. Mrs. Miller, noting Eden's surprise, leaned closer. "Sarah's father works at Morgan's ranch. Since her mother passed, Morgan's been looking out for them both. Only one she'll talk to most days." Before Eden could respond, Reverend Blackwell approached, his expression stony. "Mr. Cross, I see you found time to join us after all." Morgan set Sarah down gently, though she kept hold of his hand. "Reverend, sorry to miss your sermon, but my men needed direction on moving the herd to summer pasture." "Of course." The Reverend's tone made it clear he doubted the excuse. "Though one might think the Lord's day would take precedence over worldly concerns." "One might," Morgan agreed easily. "But then, I've always thought the Lord appreciates honest work as much as words spoken in his name." The tension between the two men was palpable. Eden glanced at little Sarah, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes, and made a decision. "Sarah," she said, crouching down to the girl's level, "I'm going to be your new teacher. Would you like to show me where you'll sit in the schoolroom tomorrow?" The child looked at her warily, then up at Morgan, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on, sweetheart. Miss Parker needs to know where all her students will be." Sarah hesitated, then released Morgan's hand and took Eden's instead. It was a small victory, but Eden felt a surge of satisfaction as she led the child away from the brewing confrontation. The schoolroom was cool and quiet after the bustle of the churchyard. Sarah moved straight to a bench in the second row, pointing silently. "Is this where you like to sit?" Eden asked, keeping her voice gentle. The girl nodded, her earlier volubility apparently reserved for Morgan alone. "It's a fine spot," Eden continued, sitting beside her. "Not too close to the front where everyone watches you, but not so far back that you can't see the blackboard." She smiled conspiratorially. "I used to sit in the middle row when I was in school, too." Sarah's eyes widened with interest, though she remained silent. "I'm a little nervous about tomorrow," Eden admitted. "It's my first day teaching here, and I want everyone to like me. Do you think they will?" After a long moment, Sarah whispered, "Mr. Cross likes you." Eden felt her cheeks warm. "Does he?" The girl nodded solemnly. "He told Papa you had kind eyes." Before Eden could process this information, the door opened and Morgan himself entered, looking somewhat harried. "There you are." The Reverend was about to organize a search party. Eden stood quickly. "Sarah was showing me her seat for tomorrow." Morgan's expression softened as he looked at the child. "Were you now, Miss Sarah?" He crouched down to her level. "And did you tell Miss Parker all my secrets while you were at it?" Sarah giggled, shaking her head. "Good, because a man's entitled to some mysteries." He winked at the girl before turning back to Eden. "The Reverends called for lunch at the church hall. Apparently, it's tradition for the new teacher to be welcomed properly." Eden nodded, smoothing her skirts nervously. "Of course. We shouldn't keep everyone waiting." As they walked back to the church, Sarah between them, Eden found herself wondering about Morgan's comment to Sarah's father. Kind eyes. It seemed such an intimate observation from a man she barely knew. The church hall was filled with long tables groaning under the weight of dishes brought by the congregation. Eden found herself seated at the head table alongside Reverend Blackwell and his wife, a thin, nervous woman who barely spoke. Morgan, she noticed, was at a table far across the room with several men she assumed were ranchers or farmers, based on their weathered appearance. Throughout the meal, Eden was introduced to more townspeople. asked endless questions about her background and teaching experience. She answered carefully, sticking to the story she had crafted that she had taught in a small school in Pennsylvania before deciding to seek adventure in the West. It wasn't entirely false. She had been a teacher's assistant in Philadelphia before everything fell apart. "And no husband waiting back east?" Mrs. Blackwell asked, one of the few times she spoke without prompting from her husband. "No," Eden replied simply. "I've never been married." "A woman alone in the world must be particularly vigilant," Reverend Blackwell commented. "The Lord provides, of course, but there are many who would take advantage." Eden nodded politely, though she was growing weary of his constant warnings. "I've found that most people are kind if given the chance to be." "A charming sentiment," the Reverend said with a tight smile. "But perhaps naive." After lunch, Eden managed to excuse herself, pleading the need to prepare for her first day of teaching. In truth, she needed escape from the Reverend's watchful eye and the curious stares of the townspeople. She felt the weight of their expectations, their judgment, and wondered if coming to Redemption Creek had been a mistake after all. As she crossed the churchyard, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Morgan following. "Walk you back to Mrs. Wilson's," he offered. Eden hesitated, aware of several people watching them, including the Reverend. "That's not necessary, Mr. Cross." "Probably not," he agreed. "But the sun's fierce today, and I happen to be heading that direction myself." She knew she should refuse, but found herself nodding instead. They fell into step together, maintaining a proper distance between them as they walked down the dusty Main Street. "You handled the Reverend's inquisition well," Morgan said after a moment. Eden glanced at him. "You were watching. Hard not to. You were the center of attention." He gave her a sidelong look. "Philadelphia, was it?" Something in his tone made Eden tense. "Yes, I taught there before coming west." Morgan nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Must have been quite a change coming to a place like this." "It was time for something new," she replied carefully. They walked in silence for a few paces before he spoke again. "The Reverend's been warning you about me." It wasn't a question, but Eden answered anyway. "He seems to think you're a bad influence." Morgan laughed softly. "I suppose I am, by his standards. I don't attend church regularly. I allow card games at my ranch on Saturday nights, and I don't think a glass of whiskey now and then damns a man's soul." "Grievous sins indeed," Eden said, unable to keep a hint of amusement from her voice. "The worst offense, though," Morgan continued, his tone becoming more serious, "is that I question his authority. Blackwell likes being the moral center of Redemption Creek. Anyone who challenges that is a threat." They had reached Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. Eden paused at the bottom of the steps, turning to face him. "Why are you telling me this, Mr. Cross?" His expression was thoughtful as he studied her. "Because I think you might be a threat too, Miss Parker. Not intentionally, perhaps, but there's something about you that doesn't quite fit the mold the Reverend has in mind for his schoolteacher." Eden felt a chill at his words, so close to the truth. "I'm just here to teach children." "Of course," he agreed easily. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "But if you ever need an ally against Blackwell's particular brand of righteousness, you should know you have one." Before she could respond, the door to the boarding house opened and Mrs. Wilson appeared. "There you are, Miss Parker. I was beginning to worry." Her gaze shifted to Morgan, her expression warming. "Morgan Cross, twice in church in 1 month. The Reverend will be declaring miracles next." Morgan laughed, tipping his hat to the older woman. "Just escorting Miss Parker home safely, Mrs. Wilson. I'll leave her in your capable hands." As he turned to go, he met Eden's eyes once more. "Good luck tomorrow, Miss Parker. The children are lucky to have you." Eden watched him walk away, troubled by his perceptiveness. How had he sensed her unease with the Reverend? And what did he mean she didn't fit the mold? Had she already made some mistake that revealed her careful facade? "He's a good man," Mrs. Wilson said, breaking into her thoughts. "Whatever the Reverend might say." Eden nodded absently, following the older woman inside. She needed to focus on tomorrow, on making a good impression with her students. Morgan Cross and his unsettling insights would have to wait. The first day of school dawned bright and clear. Eden arrived early, arranging books and slates at each place, writing her name neatly on the blackboard, Miss Parker. She had chosen her plainest dress, a gray that she hoped conveyed suitable seriousness, and pinned her hair in a tight bun at the nape of her neck. The children began arriving shortly after 8, some eager, some clearly reluctant. Eden greeted each one warmly, noting their names and ages in a small book she kept on her desk. By 8:30, 20 children were seated before her, ranging from tiny 6-year-old Eliza Collins to lanky 16-year-old Thomas Wright. "Good morning," Eden began, pleased that her voice sounded steady. "I'm Miss Parker, your new teacher. I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you." The morning progressed smoothly. Eden assessed the children's knowledge, finding most at appropriate levels for their ages, though a few were behind in reading or mathematics. Sarah Jenkins remained silent but attentive, responding to questions with nods or shakes of her head. At noon, Eden dismissed the children for lunch, watching as they scattered into the schoolyard with their pails and bundles. She was about to enjoy her own simple meal when she noticed a figure approaching from the direction of the Main Street Morgan Cross, leading his horse by the reins. The children greeted him enthusiastically, especially the younger boys who crowded around to admire his mount. Eden watched as he spoke to each child by name, asking questions about their first morning with the new teacher. "Miss Parker," he called, raising a hand in greeting as he approached the schoolhouse steps. "I trust your first day is going well." Eden nodded, conscious of several mothers picking up younger children for the lunch hour, their curious gazes fixed on the interaction. "Very well, thank you, Mr. Cross. The children are eager to learn." Morgan smiled at that. "Good to hear. I've brought something for your classroom if you'll permit it." Intrigued despite herself, Eden stepped aside to let him enter. Morgan reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a package wrapped in brown paper. "Maps," he explained as she unwrapped it, "of the territory and the country. Thought the children might benefit from seeing the wider world, even if they haven't traveled far themselves." Eden unfolded the top map, a beautifully detailed rendering of the Arizona Territory. "These are wonderful, Mr. Cross, thank you." "My pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "There's a book of poetry in there too, Wordsworth. Not exactly required reading, but good for the soul," Eden finished. Genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, Morgan smiled, a warm, open expression that transformed his face. "Exactly." Their eyes held for a moment too long before Eden looked away, busying herself with refolding the maps. "The children will be back soon. I should prepare for the afternoon lessons." "Of course." Morgan moved toward the door, then paused. "I meant to ask, have you had a chance to explore the town yet?" Eden shook her head. "Between preparing lessons and settling in, I haven't had much time." "There's a social at the town hall Saturday evening," he said casually. "Nothing fancy, just music and dancing, some refreshments. Might be a good way to meet more of the community." "I'd like that," Eden replied before she could think better of it. Morgan's smile widened. "Good. I'll look forward to seeing you there." After he left, Eden stood for a long moment, the package of maps and poetry in her hands, wondering what she had just agreed to. A public social was respectable enough, surely. But she couldn't shake the feeling that in accepting, she had crossed some invisible line the Reverend had drawn. The afternoon lessons went as smoothly as the morning had, though Eden found her thoughts occasionally drifting to Morgan and his unexpected gift. When the final bell rang, she dismissed the children with homework assignments and began tidying the classroom for the next day. She was erasing the blackboard when a shadow fell across the doorway. Expecting Morgan again, she turned with a smile that faltered when she saw Reverend Blackwell instead. "Miss Parker," he greeted her, stepping into the room. "I trust your first day went well." "Very well, thank you," Eden replied, setting down the eraser. "The children are bright and eager." The Reverend nodded, his gaze sweeping the classroom and stopping at the maps now hanging on the wall. "New decorations, a gift," Eden explained, feeling oddly defensive. "Mr. Cross thought they would help the children understand geography better." "Did he?" The Reverend's tone was cold. "Mr. Cross seems unusually interested in educational matters." Eden straightened her shoulders. "The maps are a valuable resource, Reverend. I would have purchased similar ones myself if I'd had the means." "I'm sure." He moved closer, examining the materials on her desk. "And this?" He picked up the book of poetry Morgan had included, also a gift, for the older students who might appreciate poetry. The Reverend flipped through the pages with a frown. "Wordsworth. Hardly essential reading for farm children, Miss Parker." "Perhaps not essential," Eden agreed, her patience wearing thin. "But beauty and art have value beyond the practical, don't you think?" "Beauty can be a distraction from more important matters," the Reverend countered, setting the book down with obvious distaste. "Such as moral education." "I assure you, the children's moral education is not being neglected," Eden said firmly. "Today we discussed honesty and the importance of treating others with kindness." Reverend Blackwell studied her for a long moment. "You seem defensive, Miss Parker. I wonder why that might be." Eden took a deep breath, calming herself. "I apologize if I seem so, Reverend. It's been a long first day." "Indeed." He moved toward the door, then turned back. "I heard Mr. Cross invited you to the social on Saturday." Eden's surprise must have shown on her face, for he continued, "News travels quickly in small towns, Miss Parker. You would do well to remember that." After he left, Eden sank into her chair, trembling slightly with suppressed anger. The Reverend's constant scrutiny was becoming intolerable. What right did he have to question her teaching methods or monitor her social engagements? Yet she knew the answer. He had every right, as the person who had hired her despite her lack of proper references. Without his approval, she would lose her position, and with it, any hope of building a respectable life here. The rest of the week passed in a similar pattern. Eden's days were filled with teaching, her students responding well to her methods and gradually warming to her. Even Sarah Jenkins began to participate more, though she still didn't speak in front of the class. The Reverend continued his daily inspections, each one feeling more like an inquisition than a friendly visit. Morgan didn't come to the school again, though Eden occasionally spotted him in town, always receiving a polite tip of his hat but nothing more. She wondered if the Reverend had spoken to him, warned him away from her. By Saturday evening, Eden was both exhausted and anxious. She stood before the small mirror in her room, debating her choice of dress. The blue was modest but plain. The green brought out her eyes but might be considered too fashionable. The red, the one that had drawn such stares when she arrived, remained hanging in the back of the wardrobe, unworn since that first day. In the end, she chose the green, pinning her hair in a style that was neat but softer than her usual schoolteacher's bun. Mrs. Wilson, waiting for her in the parlor, nodded approvingly. "You look lovely, dear. A breath of fresh air in this dusty old town." They walked together to the town hall, a modest building near the center of Redemption Creek. Music spilled from its open doors, along with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Inside, Eden found most of the town already gathered, from the youngest children to the oldest grandparents. Several people greeted her warmly, parents thanking her for the positive reports their children had brought home about school. Eden began to relax, moving through the crowd with growing confidence. Perhaps she could find a place here after all. Miss Parker. The familiar, deep voice behind her sent an unexpected thrill down her spine. You came. She turned to find Morgan Cross watching her with evident pleasure. He was dressed much as he had been at church, in a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. I said I would, she replied, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. So you did. His eyes took in her appearance, lingering briefly on her face. You look beautiful tonight. Eden felt herself blush like a schoolgirl. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Morgan, please. We're not in school now. Morgan, she repeated, testing the familiarity of it. Then you must call me Eden. He smiled at that, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Eden, it suits you. The music changed then, shifting to a lively reel. Morgan gestured toward the cleared space where couples were forming lines for the dance. Would you honor me with a dance? Eden, she hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. His hand was warm on hers as he led her to the floor. Eden was acutely aware of eyes following them, including the Reverend's disapproving gaze from across the room. But as the music swept them into motion, she found herself caring less and less about Blackwell's opinion. Morgan proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her through the steps with confident ease. When the reel ended and a waltz began, he drew her closer, his hand resting lightly at her waist. You dance well, he observed as they moved smoothly among the other couples. My father insisted on lessons, Eden replied. He said a lady should know how to dance properly, even if she never attended grand balls. Wise man, Morgan said. Was he disappointed when you chose teaching over society? Eden's smile faltered slightly at the mention of her father. He died before I made that choice, but I think he would have understood. Morgan's expression softened. I'm sorry. It was many years ago, Eden assured him, though the pain of loss had never fully faded. What about your family? Are they in the East? A shadow crossed his face. My parents are both gone, no siblings. The ranch is my family now, I suppose. And a demanding one from what I hear, Eden said, grateful for the change of subject. Samuel tells me you have the largest herd in the territory, Morgan laughed. Samuel exaggerates, but we do all right. The waltz ended, and Morgan led her to the refreshment table, fetching them both glasses of punch. They stood together near the edge of the room, watching the dancers and continuing their conversation. Eden found herself relaxing in his company, enjoying his dry humor and thoughtful observations about the town and its inhabitants. You're different here, Morgan said after a while, studying her over the rim of his glass. Different, Eden repeated, puzzled. From the schoolroom, he clarified. There you're all proper and contained, but here. His eyes held hers. Here I can see glimpses of who you might be when you're not watching every word. Eden felt a flicker of alarm at his perception. Perhaps the music makes me less guarded. Perhaps. He didn't sound convinced. Or perhaps there's more to Eden Parker than she allows Redemption Creek to see. Before she could formulate a response, Reverend Blackwell appeared beside them, his wife trailing nervously in his wake. Miss Parker, Mr. Cross. He acknowledged them with a tight nod. Enjoying the festivities? Very much, Eden replied politely. It's a lovely gathering. Indeed, though some might consider certain dances inappropriate for public occasions. The Reverend's pointed glance at the couples now engaged in a somewhat boisterous Virginia reel made his disapproval clear. "I find joy is rarely inappropriate, Reverend," Morgan said mildly, "especially when shared by a community." Blackwell's lips thinned. "Joy and indulgence are not synonymous, Mr. Cross, though you seem to confuse them regularly." "Gentlemen," Mrs. Blackwell interrupted timidly, "perhaps this isn't the place for such discussions." Eden silently blessed the woman for her intervention. "Mrs. Blackwell is right. We should focus on the pleasant evening." The Reverend seemed about to argue, but instead offered his arm to his wife. "Very well. Miss Parker, remember that tomorrow is the Lord's Day. I expect to see you at services, regardless of how late tonight's celebrations continue." After they moved away, Morgan shook his head. That man could find sin in a sunrise. "He means well," Eden said, though she wasn't entirely convinced of it herself. "Does he?" Morgan's expression was skeptical. "Or does he enjoy the power that comes with defining others' morality?" Eden had no answer for that. She had wondered the same thing herself, especially after the Reverend's increasingly intrusive inspections of her classroom. The evening continued pleasantly despite the brief tension. Eden danced again with Morgan, as well as with several other men from town, including kindly Mr. Harris from the boarding house. But her eyes kept finding Morgan across the room, drawn to him as if by some invisible force. As the hour grew late, families with young children began to depart. Eden, mindful of the Reverend's reminder about church the next day, decided it was time for her to leave as well. "I'll walk you home," Morgan offered when she told him of her intention to depart. "Mrs. Wilson," Eden began, looking around for her landlady. "Left an hour ago with a headache," Morgan informed her. "She asked me to see you safely back when you were ready." Eden hesitated, weighing propriety against the simple desire for Morgan's company a little longer. "All right, thank you." The night air was cool after the warmth of the crowded hall. Stars blanketed the sky above them, more stars than Eden had ever seen in Philadelphia's gas-lit streets. They walked in comfortable silence for a time, their footsteps the only sound on the quiet street. "I enjoyed tonight," Morgan said at last, "especially the dancing." "So did I," Eden admitted. "It's been a long time since I attended anything like this." "No socials in Philadelphia?" he asked casually. Eden tensed slightly. "None so informal. Everything there was governed by strict rules of etiquette. And here the rules seem different," she said carefully, "though no less strict in their own way." They had reached Mrs. Wilson's boarding house. Eden paused at the bottom of the steps, turning to face him. "Thank you for walking me home, Morgan. My pleasure." He studied her face in the moonlight, his expression thoughtful. "Eden, may I ask you something?" "Of course," she replied, though her heart quickened nervously. "What are you running from?" The directness of the question took her breath away. I don't know what you mean." Morgan's gaze was gentle but unwavering. "I think you do. There's something in your eyes, sometimes a wariness that goes beyond the natural caution of a woman alone in a new place." Eden looked away, unable to meet his penetrating gaze. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and lifted her chin with one finger until their eyes met again. "I don't think so. But whatever it is, Eden, it doesn't matter to me." She felt tears threaten and blinked them away. "It would if you knew. Try me." His voice was low, intimate in the darkness. For a wild moment, Eden was tempted to tell him everything about Philadelphia, about the scandal, about the desperate flight west with barely enough money for the journey. But the moment passed and reason reasserted itself. "It's late," she said instead, "and I have church in the morning." Morgan didn't press, simply nodding and stepping back. "Of course. Sleep well, Eden." "Good night, Morgan." She turned and climbed the steps, feeling his eyes on her back until she disappeared inside. In her room, Eden sank onto the bed, trembling slightly. How had he seen through her so easily? And what would happen when not if, but when the truth finally caught up with her? Sunday morning brought rain, a sudden summer downpour that turned Redemption Creek's dusty streets to mud. Eden hurried to church beneath a borrowed umbrella, arriving just as the service was about to begin. She slipped into a pew near the back, noting that Morgan was once again absent from the congregation. Reverend Blackwell's sermon seemed particularly fire and brimstone that morning, focusing on the themes of deception and divine judgment. Eden sat rigidly through it, feeling as though every word was directed specifically at her. "The Lord sees all," the Reverend thundered from his pulpit. "Every lie, every sin, every secret thought we believe hidden. Nothing escapes his judgment, and his justice will not be denied." After the service, Eden tried to slip away quickly, but the Reverend intercepted her at the door. "Miss Parker, a moment of your time, if you please." Reluctantly, she followed him to his small office attached to the church. The room was austere, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a large cross on the wall. "Please sit," he gestured to one of the chairs before taking his place behind the desk. "I wanted to speak with you privately about a matter of some concern." Eden's heart hammered in her chest as she sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Yes, Reverend. I received a letter yesterday," he began, watching her face closely. "From a colleague in Philadelphia." Eden felt the blood drain from her face. "I see. He writes that a woman matching your description left the city under difficult circumstances earlier this year." The Reverend's voice was deceptively mild. "A scandal involving a prominent married man." Eden swallowed hard, fighting to keep her expression neutral. "Many women leave the East for various reasons, Reverend." "Indeed they do." He leaned forward, fingers steepled before him. "My colleague mentioned that this particular woman was named Eden Parker, and that she had been employed as a teacher's assistant before her. Indiscretion was discovered." There was no point in denying it now. "I assume you'll want my resignation," Eden said quietly, her dreams of a fresh start crumbling before her eyes. To her surprise, the Reverend shook his head. "Not necessarily. The children have responded well to your teaching, and qualified instructors are difficult to find in a place like Redemption Creek." Hope flickered briefly before he continued. "However, I must insist on certain conditions. Your behavior must be beyond reproach. No more dancing with men of questionable character, no more private conversations with Mr. Cross." Eden stiffened at the mention of Morgan. "Mr. Cross has been nothing but respectful toward me." "His intentions may seem honorable," Reverend Blackwell countered, "but a woman with your history cannot afford even the appearance of impropriety. If word of your past reached the parents of your students, they would demand your immediate dismissal." The threat was clear. Comply with his demands or be exposed. Eden felt sick with anger and fear. "You would use this information to control me." "I prefer to think of it as guiding you toward redemption," the Reverend replied smoothly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Parker. I'm offering you one, provided you demonstrate a genuine commitment to moral living." Eden rose from her chair, fighting to maintain her dignity. "May I have time to consider, of course." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Until tomorrow morning. I'll expect your decision before school begins." Eden left the church, barely noticing the rain that still fell steadily. Her mind raced with desperate thoughts. She could leave Redemption Creek, start over somewhere else, but with what money? Her savings were nearly depleted after the journey west, and who would hire her without references? Lost in her troubled thoughts, she didn't notice the rider approaching until he called her name. Eden, what are you doing out in this downpour? She looked up to find Morgan on horseback, concern evident in his expression as he took in her bedraggled appearance. Just thinking, she managed, blinking rain from her eyes. Without hesitation, Morgan dismounted and moved to her side, shielding her with his coat. You're soaked through. Come on, Mrs. Wilson's is just down the street. Eden allowed him to guide her, too numb with shock and despair to protest. When they reached the boarding house, he insisted on seeing her safely inside. You should change into dry clothes, he said as they stood in the empty parlor, Mrs. Wilson apparently out for the afternoon. You'll catch your death otherwise. Eden nodded mechanically. Yes, of course. Morgan studied her with growing concern. Eden, what's happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. She almost laughed at that. In a way, she had the ghost of her past finally catching up to her. It's nothing, just the weather affecting my spirits. Don't lie to me, he said quietly. Not now. Something in his tone broke through her defenses. The Reverend knows, she whispered. About Philadelphia, about everything. Understanding dawned in Morgan's eyes. Ah, and he's using it against you somehow. Eden nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. He says I can keep my position if I agree to his guidance, including staying away from you. Morgan's jaw tightened. That sanctimonious bastard. He's right, though, Eden said bitterly. What I did was wrong. I have no right to complain about the consequences. What exactly did you do? Morgan asked, his voice gentler now. Eden hesitated, then decided there was nothing left to lose. I fell in love with the wrong man, the headmaster at the school where I worked. He was married, but he told me he was separated, that they lived together in name only. She laughed humorlessly. I believed him like a naive fool. And when the truth came out, Morgan prompted, his wife discovered our letters. There was a terrible scene at the school. She called me. Horrible things, true things, Eden admitted. I lost my position, my reputation, everything. No one would hire me. The only references I could secure were from a sympathetic teacher who took pity on me. So you came west, Morgan finished for her. Eden nodded. I thought no one would know me here, that I could start fresh. She wiped away another tear. But the past follows, it seems. Morgan was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Eden's surprise, he reached out and took her hand in his. Listen to me, Eden. We all have pasts, some worse than others, but none of us are without regret or shame. His grip tightened slightly. What matters is who we choose to be now, today. The Reverend doesn't see it that way, Eden said, though she found unexpected comfort in Morgan's words. Blackwell sees the world in black and white, Morgan replied. It's easier that way. No messy complications, no difficult questions about grace or forgiveness. Eden searched his face, finding no judgment there, only compassion and something deeper that made her heart race. Why aren't you disgusted with me? His smile was tender. Because I see you, Eden. Not just what you did, but who you are. A woman brave enough to travel across the country alone, determined enough to build a new life, kind enough to reach out to a silent child when others had given up. The tears came freely now, relief mingling with gratitude. Morgan drew her gently into his arms, and Eden went willingly, burying her face against his shoulder as she wept. I don't know what to do, she confessed when the tears finally subsided. If I refuse his conditions, he'll expose me. If I agree, I'll be under his control indefinitely. Morgan's hand moved soothingly against her back. There might be another way, he said slowly, but you'd have to trust me. Eden pulled back slightly to look at him. What do you mean? I can't tell you yet, he replied. I need to speak to some people first. But promise me you'll stall Blackwell tomorrow. Tell him you need more time to consider. He won't be patient for long, Eden warned. He won't need to be. Morgan's expression was determined. Just give me until Tuesday evening. Can you do that? Eden hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes. Good. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering. Try to rest now. Everything will look different soon, I promise. After Morgan left, Eden changed into dry clothes and sat by the window, watching the rain continue to fall. She had no idea what he was planning, but for the first time since the Reverend's revelation, she felt a glimmer of hope. Monday morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Eden dressed carefully for school, mentally preparing her response to the Reverend. She would ask for more time, as Morgan had suggested, though she had little faith that Blackwell would agree. To her surprise, the Reverend was not waiting at the schoolhouse as usual. Eden conducted her morning classes with one eye on the door, expecting him to appear at any moment, but he never came. By the lunch break, her nerves were stretched thin with anticipation. It was Samuel who finally brought news, rushing into the classroom with excitement shining in his eyes. Miss Parker, have you heard? Mr. Cross is challenging the Reverend's position on the town council. Eden stared at the boy in confusion. What do you mean, Samuel? Pa says Mr. Cross is gathering signatures for a special vote, Samuel explained breathlessly. Says the Reverend's been running things like a tyrant and it's time for change. They're meeting at the saloon right now. Eden's heart raced as she began to understand Morgan's plan. By challenging Blackwell's authority publicly, he was creating a distraction and possibly undermining the Reverend's power to threaten her. The afternoon dragged endlessly, each tick of the clock seeming to take minutes rather than seconds. When the final bell rang and the children had departed, Eden quickly gathered her things and headed toward Mrs. Wilson's, hoping for news. She found the boarding house abuzz with excitement, Mrs. Wilson herself in the center of a group of boarders discussing the day's events. Miss Parker. The older woman called when she spotted Eden. Have you heard about the town meeting tonight? Seems your Mr. Cross has stirred up quite the hornet's nest. He's not my Mr. Cross, Eden corrected automatically, though her cheeks warmed at the implication. What exactly is happening, Mrs. Wilson beckoned her closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Morgan's called for a vote of confidence in Reverend Blackwell's leadership. Says the Reverend's been using his position to control and intimidate folks rather than guide them spiritually. And people are supporting this. Eden asked, amazed. More than you'd think, Mrs. Wilson replied with evident satisfaction. Seems the Reverend stepped on plenty of toes over the years. The meeting's at 7 at the town hall if you're interested. Eden retreated to her room, mind whirling with the implications. Was Morgan doing this for her, or had her situation simply provided the spark for a conflict that had been brewing for some time? Either way, she knew she couldn't miss the meeting. At 7:15, Eden made her way to the town hall, surprised to find it already crowded when she arrived. She slipped into a seat near the back, scanning the room for Morgan, but not seeing him among the gathered townspeople. Reverend Blackwell stood at the front, his expression thunderous as he conversed with several members of the town council. The atmosphere was charged with tension, conversations hushed but animated throughout the room. At precisely 7, the mayor, a portly man named Jenkins, who Eden recognized as Sarah's grandfather, called the meeting to order. Friends and neighbors were gathered tonight at the request of Mr. Morgan Cross, who has raised concerns about the governance of our town. Mr. Cross, would you care to address the assembly? Morgan emerged from a side room, his expression grave but determined as he took his place at the front. Eden's breath caught at the sight of him, not dressed in his usual rancher's attire, but in a formal suit that lent him an unexpected air of authority. Thank you, Mayor Jenkins, Morgan began, his deep voice carrying easily through the hall. I appreciate everyone coming out tonight on such short notice. I've called this meeting because I believe Redemption Creek stands at a crossroads. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before continuing. When I came to this territory 5 years ago, this town was little more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings. Together, we've built something to be proud of, a community where people look out for each other, where hard work is valued, where differences are respected. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Morgan nodded, acknowledging them before his expression grew more serious. But recently, I've seen troubling signs. I've seen good people silenced for questioning authority. I've seen moral judgments used as weapons rather than tools for growth. I've seen fear replace respect as the foundation of leadership. His eyes found Reverend Blackwell, who stood rigidly at the side of the room. I believe the Reverend has served this community faithfully in many ways. His dedication to the church is beyond question. But I also believe that no one person should hold unchecked power over others, not through political office, not through spiritual authority, not through the manipulation of information. A sudden stillness fell over the room at these words. Eden realized Morgan was deliberately addressing what the Reverend had done to her, without exposing her secret. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Cross?" Mayor Jenkins asked. "Two things," Morgan replied. "First, that we establish a proper school board, independent of the church, to oversee educational matters. And second, that we require transparency in all town council decisions, with minutes of meetings made available to any citizen who wishes to review them." The Reverend stepped forward then, his face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. Mr. Cross has no authority to demand such changes. His obvious agenda—" "And what agenda would that be, Reverend?" Morgan interrupted mildly. Blackwell hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly to where Eden sat. She held her breath, certain he was about to expose her publicly, but before he could speak, Mrs. Miller rose from her seat. "I think Mr. Cross's suggestions have merit. My twins speak highly of Miss Parker's teaching, yet I've heard the Reverend has been inspecting the classroom daily, questioning her methods. A school board with parents represented would provide better oversight." Others began to voice similar opinions. Eden watched in amazement as person after person stood to support Morgan's proposals, many adding their own stories of the Reverend's heavy-handed approach to governance. Reverend Blackwell's face grew increasingly pale as the tide turned against him. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost its usual commanding tone. "If the town wishes for changes in administration, so be it. But let me remind you all that moral leadership requires difficult decisions. Not all will be popular." Morgan nodded acknowledgement of this point. "True leadership isn't about popularity, Reverend. It's about serving the community's best interests, all of the community, not just those who agree with you." The meeting continued for another hour, the details of the proposed changes discussed and debated. In the end, a vote was called and Morgan's suggestions were approved by a significant margin. A school board would be established immediately, with elections for positions to be held the following week. As the meeting broke up, Eden remained in her seat, stunned by the swift turn of events. Morgan had not only neutralized the Reverend's threat against her, but had managed to create institutional change that would protect others from similar manipulation. When the crowd thinned, Morgan finally approached her, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Well, schoolteacher, it seems you'll have a proper board overseeing your work now, not just one man's opinion. You did all this for me?" Eden asked softly, still hardly believing it. Morgan shook his head. "Not entirely. Blackwell's been consolidating power for years." Your situation just made me realize it was time someone challenged him." He smiled slightly. "Though I can't deny that protecting you was a powerful motivation." Eden glanced across the room, where the Reverend was engaged in intense conversation with several church elders. "He still knows my secret." "Yes," Morgan acknowledged. "But now the whole town has seen him lose a significant battle. If he tries to expose you out of spite, people will question his motives." "Thank you," Eden said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for what he had done. Morgan offered his arm. "May I walk you home, Miss Parker? It's getting late." Eden took his arm without hesitation, no longer concerned about who might be watching or what they might think. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, she felt lighter than she had in months, the burden of fear and secrecy somewhat eased. "What happens now?" she asked as they walked slowly toward Mrs. Wilson's. "Now," Morgan said thoughtfully, "you continue teaching without the Reverend looking over your shoulder constantly. The school board will meet next week once members are elected, and as for Blackwell," he shrugged, "he'll adapt or he won't. Either way, his absolute authority is broken. And us?" The question slipped out before Eden could think better of it. Morgan stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his expression was serious yet tender. "That depends on you, Eden. I care for you more than I expected to, more than is probably wise given how short a time we've known each other, but I won't pressure you." Eden studied his face, this man who had risked so much to protect her. "Why? Why would you do all this for someone with my past?" "Because your past isn't who you are," he said simply. "It's just something that happened to you. I've seen who you are, Eden in the classroom with the children, at the social when you thought no one was watching, even tonight when you sat there afraid but still dignified." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I meant what I said to Blackwell that first day. If you're a temptation, then I'm falling willingly. But it's not just physical attraction, it's admiration, respect, and something deeper that I'm not sure I have words for yet." Eden's heart swelled with emotion. For so long she had believed that her mistake had defined her, had marked her permanently as unworthy of honest love. Yet here was a man who knew the worst of her and still saw the best. "I'm still afraid," she admitted. "Not just of the Reverend, but of this." "Of trusting again." Morgan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know. And I'll wait, Eden, for as long as it takes. We don't have to rush." She smiled then, a genuine smile that felt like the first real one in ages. "But you'll keep calling on me, even if the Reverend disapproves." "Especially if he disapproves," Morgan replied with a grin. "Though I'll be properly respectful, of course. Don't want to scandalize Mrs. Wilson." Eden laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. "Heaven forbid." They continued walking, hands still linked, the comfortable silence between them filled with possibility rather than fear. When they reached Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, Morgan released her hand reluctantly. "Good night, Eden," he said softly. "Sleep well." "Good night, Morgan." On impulse, she reached up and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his cheek. "And thank you again for everything." His smile as she pulled away was worth every risk, every fear she had faced. As Eden climbed the steps to the boarding house, she felt something new blossoming inside her, not just hope, but the beginnings of joy. The following weeks brought significant changes to Redemption Creek. The newly elected school board met for the first time, with Morgan and Mrs. Miller among its members, along with 3 other parents and Mr. Harris from the bank. They approved Eden's curriculum enthusiastically and allocated funds for additional books and supplies. Reverend Blackwell maintained a stony silence toward both Eden and Morgan, but he made no move to expose her past. Whether from strategic calculation or genuine reconsideration of his actions, He seemed to have accepted the town's decision to limit his authority. Morgan called on Eden regularly, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Wilson or other respectable ladies of the town. They took Sunday afternoon walks, attended community gatherings together, and gradually, Eden found herself trusting again not just Morgan, but herself and her own judgment. Sarah Jenkins began speaking in class, her small voice growing stronger each day. Other children flourished under Eden's guidance, their natural curiosity encouraged rather than suppressed. Parents remarked on the positive changes, and Eden found herself truly accepted as part of the community for the first time. One warm evening in late September, Morgan invited Eden to dinner at his ranch. Mrs. Wilson agreed to accompany her as chaperone, though she tactfully occupied herself with Morgan's housekeeper for much of the evening, leaving the couple to converse privately on the wide porch that overlooked the rolling grasslands. "It's beautiful here," Eden said, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "So peaceful." Morgan nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains. "I knew the first time I saw this land that it was where I belonged. After years of wandering, it felt like coming home." "You never told me why you left the East," Eden remarked. "What brought you west in the first place?" Morgan was silent for a long moment before answering. "War. I fought for the Union. Afterward, well, home didn't feel like home anymore." Eden studied his profile, seeing the shadows of old pain in his expression. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said, turning to her with a small smile. "If I hadn't come west, I wouldn't have found this place. Or you." Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining as they had so many times over the past weeks. Eden marveled at how comfortable it felt now, how right. "Eden," Morgan began, his voice suddenly serious, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes." He shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness, watching you build a place for yourself here, it's made me realize what I've been missing all these years." Eden held her breath as he continued, hardly daring to hope for what his words seemed to be leading toward. "I know it hasn't been long, and I promised not to rush you," Morgan said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I also know what I feel, and I don't want to waste more time pretending it's anything less than what it is." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "Eden Parker, I love you, with your past and my past and whatever future we might build together. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Eden's eyes as he opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a single diamond set in gold. "Morgan," she whispered, "are you certain?" "My reputation is no one's business but ours," he finished firmly. "Eden, I don't care what happened in Philadelphia. I care about who you are, here and now. And I know with absolute certainty that I want to spend my life with you." Eden looked into his eyes and saw nothing but love and sincerity there. The fears that had haunted her since Philadelphia seemed to melt away, replaced by a certainty that matched his own. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger as joy flooded through her. "Yes, I'll marry you, Morgan." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he drew her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised everything: protection, passion, partnership, and a love that saw beyond mistakes to the truth of who she was. Mrs. Wilson's delighted exclamation from the doorway broke them apart, both laughing as the older woman rushed forward to examine the ring and offer her congratulations. "Well, it's about time," Mrs. Wilson declared. "I've been waiting for this announcement since the town meeting." "Oh, we must begin planning immediately. A June wedding would be lovely, don't you think?" as Mrs. Wilson continued excitedly listing all that would need to be arranged. Morgan caught Eden's eye over the older woman's head, his expression so full of love and amusement that Eden couldn't help laughing again. This was what happiness felt like. She realized not the absence of past pain, but the presence of current joy so powerful it overshadowed everything else. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Redemption Creek. Most of the town responded with congratulations and well wishes, though a few, including Reverend Blackwell, maintained a cool distance. Eden found she cared less about their approval than she would have expected. The happiness she had found with Morgan was too precious to be diminished by others' judgment. They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in June, giving them plenty of time to prepare. Eden continued teaching, her days filled with lessons, and her evenings often spent at Morgan's ranch, planning their future together. The house would need expanding, they agreed, especially if they were blessed with children someday. "I never thought I'd have this," Eden confessed one evening as they sat together on the porch swing, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "After everything that happened, I believed that part of my life was over." Morgan drew her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I felt the same way after the war. Thought I'd spend my life alone, building something to leave to strangers when I was gone. And now," she asked, tilting her face to look at him. His smile was tender as he traced the curve of her cheek. "Now I can't imagine a day without you in it." When June finally arrived, Eden woke on her wedding day to find the sky a perfect cloudless blue. Mrs. Wilson helped her dress in the wedding gown they had worked on together, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, a crown of wildflowers replacing the traditional veil. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Wilson said, tears shining in her eyes as she stepped back to admire her handiwork. "Absolutely radiant." The ceremony was held outdoors, on a gentle rise overlooking Morgan's ranch. Nearly the entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the rows of chairs set up beneath a canopy of white flowers and ribbons. Even Reverend Blackwell was present, though he had declined to perform the ceremony, a role filled instead by a circuit judge who was an old friend of Morgan's. As Eden walked toward Morgan, who waited for her beneath an arch of roses, she felt no fear, no doubt, only a profound certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. His face as he watched her approach was filled with such love that she felt tears threaten, happy tears that spoke of joy too great to contain. "Dearly beloved," the judge began once Eden reached Morgan's side, their hands joining naturally. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Morgan Cross and Eden Parker in the sacred bond of matrimony." The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken with clear voices that carried across the gathered assembly. When Morgan slipped the gold band onto her finger to join the engagement ring, Eden felt the last lingering shadows of her past finally recede completely. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared, beaming at them both. "Morgan, you may kiss your bride." Morgan's lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their promises, sweet and tender yet filled with passion that spoke of the night to come. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Cross for the first time, the cheers and applause washed over them like a blessing. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing, food and drink flowing freely. Eden danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around the floor with the same grace he had shown that first night at the social. "Happy Mrs. Cross," he murmured as they swayed together to a slower melody. "Completely," she assured him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Though I'm beginning to think we could slip away without anyone noticing." Morgan chuckled, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. "Eager to begin our married life, are you?" Eden lifted her face to his, no longer concerned about who might be watching. "Eager to begin forever with you," she corrected. Later, after they had bid farewell to their guests and retreated to the privacy of their home, Eden stood by the bedroom window, gazing out at the starlit landscape that was now as much hers as it was Morgan's. "What are you thinking?" he asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Eden leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his body against hers. "I'm thinking about the day I arrived in Redemption Creek," she said softly. "How afraid I was, how certain that my life would never be truly happy again." Morgan pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck. "And now," she turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face. "Now I know that what felt like an ending was actually a beginning. That sometimes what seems like our greatest mistake can lead us to our greatest blessing." "You are certainly mine," Morgan murmured, drawing her closer. "My blessing, my love, my wife." As his lips found hers again, Eden surrendered to the love she had once thought impossible, a love born in a dusty western town where a preacher had seen only temptation. But a cowboy had seen the woman behind the mask and had fallen willingly, bringing her with him into joy. Years passed, and Redemption Creek grew and changed. The railroad came, bringing new faces and opportunities. Eden continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after the little girl who had helped bring them together. 2 years later, a son joined the family, strong and healthy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Morgan's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Eden's past remained in the past, the scandal in Philadelphia forgotten as she built a life filled with purpose and love. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard with the family dog. Morgan's arm was around Eden's waist, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder in the familiar pose that had become second nature over the years. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Eden looked up at him, at the face that had grown even dearer with time, the lines around his eyes now speaking of laughter and joy more than hardship. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, even the painful ones, brought me here to you. How could I regret that?" Morgan smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Do you remember what I said to the Reverend that first day, about falling willingly?" "I remember," Eden said, returning his smile. "It was terribly forward of you." "And entirely true," he replied, drawing her closer. "I'm still falling, Eden, every day with you." As the